I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Andrew Winkelmann, who is the North American lead for cloud security. Andrew has a extensive experience in delivering complex business cloud solutions across various industries. Even though we lost a little bit of time, I'm not taking much time, I would like to hand it over to Andrew. Andrew's here to deliver cloud security enabling the business presentation. Thank you very much, Andrew. Off to you.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Yeah, welcome everyone. My coffee is a little bit more than usual. Usually the security sessions in the past is before lunch or at the end of the day, AKA the buffer slot period. And so, yeah, thanks for being here. It's amazing just the shift that security is now a larger focus. And the reasons for security being a larger focus are probably pretty apparent, but sometimes it takes issues and large public items, security breaches, for security to be a priority. So it's awesome that we're top of the morning in security is one of the first sessions. So thanks everyone for joining us. I'm going to talk about kind of how Accenture and our cloud first initiative, and how we've been successful enabling the business. Very, I don't think I've had my entire career where security hasn't been, let's say, a blocker, or people are a huge fan of the security practice. And so, my first kind of item is security holding back the business from growth, your business from growth, innovation, and continuous improvement. And what would the impact be, right? If security was no longer, the team of no, but the team that enables the business and drives at the same speed. That's how we've been really successful with our security practices. Security can hit kind of four main items, right? Fast, as frictionless as possible, cost effective, and then proactive. And I'll go into some of these different components a little bit later in this session. But those are the four main things we kind of moved to as a practice, for our cloud security a couple of years ago. The traditional ways we used to do security are different in the cloud. And so you don't have firewalls, you don't have hardware, things that, can block like you used to, but you can actually be more secure in the public cloud, if you enable the business and you kind of act like a developer and app teams, right? Infrastructure as code, and develop at the same pace and bake security in, right? If security's, we're going live next week and security topic just comes up, very rarely is that a good topic. And so that's how it's security from the beginning, but make it easy and proactive. And so as you can see, the pace of change is just incredible. And when I looked at this, about a year ago, SAP's been around for a long time, almost 40 years next year, SAP's been around. But just the pace of everything's changing so quickly. And then if you see at the top too, the sales of PCs, hit a peak in 2010. That's no longer true, right? Because the pandemic, the PC sales went up huge. And so, there is ebbs and flows, but just the pace of change is so quick. And so that's where, using the best of all these different things is something we've been really, really successful in. You had servers and mainframes at the start, right? Then you had virtual machines, right? And just the virtualization with VMware. The next thing was just the public cloud and microservices. Now we're data AI driven, and then, kind of on the cusp of it is, no code, low code, right? And for security, that's, very concerning, right? Because even with not low code, no code, there's security items that aren't being addressed. But just the pace of change is so quick. And so that's when I say the proactive piece of it, that's something that we really, really focused on. Alert fatigue has been a problem forever. And, no one wants to get an alert 8 hours later that maybe someone will look at, maybe not, right? So if you can bake security in and be auto mediator blocking focused, that's where you can be really, really successful. And we'll talk about some of those different areas today. But, AI and machine learning, using the best of those, for security, everyone has those, or RPA, or procedure automation, in their marketing materials, right? But how many people are actually applying it through and throughout? But we'll see more of that, taking advantage of those items and just the automation piece, as kind of time goes on. And so kind of like I talked about too, is the legacy systems. Those are still around. A significant amount of our clients still have Windows 2000 servers, right? someone created an app on that 20 years ago that left 10 years ago, right? And it's still critical. There is things you can do like putting those in a container and other stuff, but legacy systems are still around. Even when you go to the public cloud, it's very, very hard to get rid of your entire footprint. For Accenture, we're 97% in the public cloud, and that 3% is going to take a long time, if ever, to get fully off of that and into the public cloud. And so, legacy systems, traditional methods are still around, and right now we're in the digital era. So, agile, microservices, functions as a service, like serverless, so Azure Functions, Google Functions, AWS Lambda, and then going into what's next, right? Low code, no code, full stack engineers, business people creating applications. That's the future, right? And businesses need it, especially nowadays in the pandemic. And if you can get an edge and stay competitive, that's the key. But how does security be in that same line is always the problem. And so, that's something we'll kind of talk about, how we've been fairly successful. I wouldn't say it's frictionless completely, but how we've been pretty successful kind of moving a couple of years ago to thinking like the developers and IT teams and infrastructure as code and baking security in. And if you look at, we had Accenture Research did, a pretty large, initiative to go out and get different responses from CIOs, just different C-level resources, CISOs, CIOs, chief technology officers, around security. And if you can see the results here, you can see is like, what are the leaders' biggest priorities? Faster incident detection time, faster in response, shorter recovery times. And then you look at SOAR, so security orchestrated and automated response, AI, next generation firewalls, RPA, PAM, all these things like PAM, that's been around a long time, privileged access management. There's not one thing that was a priority, but remote procedure automation, that's, 3 and 4, that's a critical piece. And so all these things have an orchestrated response or some automation component to them. Next gen firewalls, not as much, outside of standing those up in an automated fashion in the public cloud and, scaling up, scaling down. But, AI, SOAR, RPA, those are critical pieces and they all have a component, for automation. And so that's what we saw, right? Is people wanted proactive, not just another tool to check a box, right? But how can I have that apply and block and be proactive and not catching up? And so that's the same thing in the public cloud, right? Is, give or take, this varies, but about 20% of the different changes you can do in the public cloud, you can do with, in the console, right? The other 80% you have to do via command line, right? So you have to apply these changes to the public cloud via command line anyway, right? Via orchestrated response in, infrastructure as code kind of mindset. And so that's something that we kind of had a priority of, doing that same concept for security. And so this is where we came down to, like, when we think about the public cloud, is everything's going to come into 3 main boxes. It's secure the platform. So the secure the platform would be like, AWS console, Azure subscription, that piece of it. It has its own separate logging, it has its own separate identity, and there are configuration components to that. And so that's one piece of it for securing the public cloud. The next piece is those specific services. So services like, Azure SQL, AWS Lambda, those are specific services, and each one of those has a separate encryption, network security. Some have firewalls natively, some don't. It has its own logging, like in Azure. It's not very simple for the logging itself. It's in the diagnostics logs or it's in the audit logs, right? Not very simple, right? So each one varies, but the security logs are baked in there. And so it has its own separate identity depending on what it is. And so that's what we think about is your traditional, like, what's different about the public cloud. Everything will fall into those 2 main categories, the platform and or the services. And, let's not forget about the traditional security tools. So, integrate to the enterprise security tools is the next step. And so almost everything in the public cloud falls into those kind of 3 main categories. And it's always a combination of native services and third-party services. Where we've had a lot of success is working with the native services for that blocking and proactive focused security services. So, there is the CSPM, or Cloud Security Posture Management. There's probably 100 of those different companies right now doing those. And they can do great auditing and limited auto remediation, but they can't do blocking. To do blocking, you have to use the native services. And so that's something that we kind of doubled down on a couple of years ago, is creating customized to clients, in AWS, Microsoft, and Google, about 50% of some of the things they offer out of the box apply to all clients. The rest of them you have to custom create, and there's not a significant amount of blocking or auto remediate available out of the box either. So that's where we focused on, is baking security in, customized to clients. So, it's when a developer has something wrong, right? Like they have Azure SQL, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Usually the first thing that happens isn't any firewall. At one time for troubleshooting, that's probably going to happen. And that's the uniqueness about the public cloud, is you're one button click from putting something on the internet. And so that's where we focused on, is creating, these guardrails where we can block that. So it doesn't, they can't do any firewall rule outbound for that. We even created one that has to hit your specific CIDR range only. Nothing else is allowed. In the same aspect for sandbox environments, we do rules where you can't even hit the CIDR range of a client, because everyone wants to test with real data, right? So that's what happens a lot of times in sandbox environments. Developers want to test with real data or real environments. And so, doing those proactive controls to block the integrations into your enterprise on the other end is what we've done too. But using the combination of third-party products, a lot of clients, majority of them are heavy in one CSP, and then they use select services in another. And so those CSPM tools are amazing at getting an auditing and your security profile across multiple cloud environments. But your identity governance and that attestation of different identities, those things don't change. You're just integrating those into the public cloud. And then same with risk management, process, procedure, compliance, and things along those lines. And so that's where we kind of think about from the public cloud, is everything kind of falls into these three main buckets. And, if you look in the green, the identity, secure configuration, encryption, we can, via proactive controls, we can block or auto remediate all those things for misconfigurations, to give people another reason not to hate security, because there's a lot of options out there already. We prefer an auto remediate for a significant amount of these. Each client's a little bit different, but anything external facing from a firewall, we like to block misconfigurations. And auto remediate is what we prefer for things like the logging wasn't enabled, or encryption wasn't at rest on the initial creation of it, because we can auto remediate that within 5 to 10 minutes, depending on a CSP. And so we prefer auto remediate because it doesn't block a deployment. But we do prefer blocking on things that bad can happen very quickly in seconds, like external facing. And so between all those, that's kind of what we had as far as our kind of viewpoint, and being more proactive in our approach versus, because you can do audit on all those things too and get an alert. But is someone actually going to look at that alert and know the context? So that's kind of how we focused on the three main things for the public cloud. And where's everything going? Like I was just talking about automation a lot, the next generation security automation platform. How do you enable the business is just getting security baked in. And if security is done, at the same time, going through your SDLC process, with the developers, starting in sandbox, going to non-production, going to staging environments, by the time it hits production, things are good to go. But, getting those, security controls baked in, and specifically giving the security settings that they need baked into templates is the kind of the North Star where we've had a lot of success. The business can move as fast as they want, and the security teams usually love it too, because the security is baked in, into those profiles. So you don't actually have to do a lot of blocking or auto remediate. We apply those at the CSP layer. So even if the settings or they go around that, it still applies. And it applies across the entire management plane as well. And so even if someone has the equivalent of domain administrator in the cloud, they still can't turn this off. They can delete the policy on the CSP level, but then you have an alert in your SIM, hopefully, that makes that a priority incident to someone to look at. But automation is the key. We've automated like standing up, Splunk universal forwarders and everything, and heavy forwarders, right, for ingesting the logs, based on the time of day, next generation firewall, standing up, standing down. in the specific settings. And so automation is kind of the name of the game to, how we've been successful for making security as frictionless as possible. And so you can see the different components. AI is a core of where those teams are going. There is some more recent, wins as far as that goes, like real AI and learning it and applying it. But using the best of the CSPs, your third-party services, and that auto scale, auto recover is critical. So self-healing is where, again, just not to triple click on this item, but that's something that we really see a lot of value in, right? Is that proactive security. And so the security controls, what's different, so you see on the left, the current approach, there's a lot of different things you have to go through, that need to be adapted, right? Like what's different? You're going from applications on servers and you're pulling servers. When you go to the public cloud, there's no hardware for the most part. And so you're at the IaaS. And so when you move up to PaaS and then even going into serverless, it changes. And so the one thing you can control across the board, whether it's on premise, whether it's in the public cloud for IaaS or PaaS or even serverless, and then going into SaaS like Office 365 or Salesforce, is identity. Identity is the one thing across the board. And I don't want to hammer on zero trust too much, because depending on which CSP or which security vendor, what zero trust means is vastly different. But zero trust identity is a huge thing. People working from home, VPNs are being saturated, and how do you make your applications publicly available, but secure? And so identity is a huge pillar that you could control at every single level, and that's something that we really, really key in on. In the next generation of applications specifically. Security code scanning doesn't go away, and it's even more critical now, because that's one of the things that you can control as well, depending on, unless it's a SaaS service, and even SaaS service, even Salesforce, there is specific components that you can create custom apps inside there too. Same with Microsoft and their Power Apps and everything else. Like SaaS and DAS scanning for secure code is critical. But going into the GitHub, right, the GitOps, DevOps, infrastructure as code, whether you're using Jenkins or Bamboo, right, for your orchestration platform, and GitHub is one of the ones we see a lot for repositories. But infrastructure as code is critical. Having the security baked into those different profiles and those deployment templates is where we've been really successful. And then we have that back end fail-safe guardrail, we'll say, for misconfigurations at the CSP layer. But this all comes down to code, and where we've been successful is hiring former developers, hiring former infrastructure as code, cloud engineers, and integrating them with our security teams. And so we have that, you have to think like a developer in order to secure like a developer. And a lot of times you have to know how to do it in order to know how to secure it. And so that's where we've been really successful, is that cross training and, doing our security in that same fashion for security as code. And then, as an example, this is like what we've created based on the different components, and just, reference architectures, and then just automation. And so, different automating the different collection of logs, there's in Azure, this is even a little bit old as of a couple of weeks ago, but, 56 different areas you can enable cloud security logging in Azure, depending on the services and the platform. And that changes. This changes, to get an example, like some of the different deployment mechanisms we have for AWS, we deploy those 6 months later, and like 15% of our code doesn't work because new additions have gone through, right? So this is something that's continuous. And, the deployment scripts and the configurations, we always try to line those up to specific industry frameworks. But NIST 853 is something we really key in on. It covers the pretty broad spectrum, but in AWS, CIS is a little bit more, popular, specifically on the servers as well. But, we have different things for Sandbox. We have different things and each company is a little bit different for some of these. Financial services is something, a key industry that's kind of differentiated, and, a little bit more risk averse. But we've had a lot of success recently on financial services, for the public cloud, but baking that security in and getting everyone comfortable, is the name of the game. I know I only have a minute, so I usually talk very fast because we were a little delayed today, so that's not by design. Security usually has a hiccup here too, right? By design. So, recommendations, how to start, how to scale. This is something that, create diverse skill set, kind of like I talked about, cloud security team that has, a vast background of folks, people that know engineering, people that know infrastructure as code, former developers, and creating helping them create your security scripts. Walk before you sprint. You can start out with audit policies and then move into those walking or auto remediate. And then, go from no to yes, but is something we've had success as well. That can be a long journey. But being secure from the start is the priority, not secure at the 11th hour. And then just build a relationship with different application teams, developer teams. Usually when you apply this, it's very well looked upon. Once the business knows they can accelerate as long as they stay within these parameters and these guardrails. And then automate even third-party different services. You can automate pretty much anything to a certain extent, but automate the cloud platform settings, then also the integrations and the other components. And then customize, right? Customize is things, know every client is different. And so, automate and specific to you as the tenant. And that's about all I had. If anyone has any questions, I'm right at the top of the hour. So really appreciate everyone's time today. We have multiple sessions for Accenture. We'd love to see you at our virtual booth as well. So it's great to be here today, and hope everyone has a great rest of your week and morning. Thank you.